I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to express the condolences of Syria to the Russian Federation after the tragic incident which claimed the lives of children in the commercial center of Komarov. Mr. President, a few minutes ago, I was checking the list of the members of the Council, and I realized that 2 of the members out of the 15 have embassies in Damascus currently. 2 members only. This is why the statements made by these 2 members reflected truly the humanitarian situation in Syria. They were able to provide an objective assessment of what is going on in Syria. Mr. President, at the end of 2016, and from this chamber, we broke the good news to our people in Syria that the Syrian government was about to liberate the eastern part of Aleppo from armed terrorist groups. And we have done so as a government, as an army, as a responsible state. And today, we break the good news to our people that the hour to liberate Eastern Ghouta from these groups has come. We declare that we will liberate the Golan, Afrin, Raqqa, and Idlib, and all parts of Syria. Because as a state, we reject any armed presence on our territory and any occupying power, regardless of the excuses, just like any of your states. These victories would not have been possible if we didn't have a just cause. They wouldn't have been possible without the sacrifices made by the Syrian army, without the support of our people and the support of our allies and friends. The facts that have come to light recently with the liberation of Eastern Ghouta from armed terrorist groups prove once again what we have always said, what we have always told you since day one of the global terrorist war waged by Saudi Arabia, Israel, Qatar, Turkey, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France against my country. Namely, that the suffering of Syrians is the result of the practices of armed terrorist groups against civilians. The testimonies of our people that are leaving Eastern Ghouta, tens of thousands of them, these testimonies reaffirm that these groups have carried out the same practices, namely, they have deprived them of their liberty, destroyed their livelihoods and their families, and prevented them from leaving in order to use them as human shields. They have taken control of humanitarian assistance in order to distribute them to their supporters or to sell them at exuberant prices. They have also targeted the safe passages allocated by the government. They targeted these passages with explosive bullets and mortar shelling, which led to the death of dozens of people, including Palestinians. We have been witness to a state of hysteria over the past weeks in the Council, as the Syrian government sought to exercise its sovereign right and to combat terrorist groups and to end any presence of terrorists in Syria, to restore stability and security, in order to implement your own resolutions against terrorism. This state of hysteria proves that the states supporting these terrorist groups have never sought to end the suffering of Syrians. They sought to perpetuate and prolong this suffering in order to blackmail this Syrian government and to save terrorists from their certain death. I would like to assure the supporters of terrorism today, some of them present in this room, that their plan has failed. Their plan to deny the terrorist nature of these Takfiri Islamist groups in order to present them as moderate Syrian opposition. This plan has failed. Eastern Ghouta did not collapse or fall, as the representative of the United States said. It was liberated, as we liberated the eastern part of Aleppo. Terrorism in Eastern Ghouta fell, collapsed. Yes, this year should be, or this day should be a day of shame, as the representative of the US said. It should be a day of shame for the supporters and sponsors of terrorism. They have supported terrorism over years in order to topple the government in Syria by force in favor of Islamist Takfiri groups. These plans have led to a great suffering among the Syrian people. And I have proof of that. The chief of the Central Section or Sector, CENTCOM, of the US Army, General Joseph Foote, in front of the Senate's committee led by Senator Lindsey Graham 2 days ago, he says the following, and I quote, "The change of the government in Syria by force in favor of a number of Islamist opposition groups has failed." End of quote. Mr. President, the Security Council held 49 formal meetings thus far to discuss the so-called humanitarian situation in Syria, as well as a number of informal emergency meetings and area formula meetings. The Council was presented with a number of reports and briefings full of falsehoods that officials of the United Nations sought to present in order to serve the policies of some influential Western countries of this Council and to pressure the Syrian government. These reports and briefings have been completely devoid of professionalism and objectivity. They have failed to take note of the attacks that were launched against the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, including the attacks by the international coalition led by the United States, and the attacks by the Turkish regime and by the Israeli occupying force. These same parties have also sought to provide support to the terrorist groups associated with ISIL, al-Nusra Front, and other militias fabricated in these countries. 49 reports. After 49 reports and hundreds of meetings, briefings, and thousands of working hours, certain countries continue to refuse to recognize that the humanitarian crisis in Syria is the result of an investment in terrorism, is the result of unilateral coercive measures. 49 reports have been issued, and I've repeated the same thing over and over again. It is as if I'm preaching in the desert. And there is a saying from the Netherlands which says, "The flowers, beautiful flowers have thorns," given that the Netherlands is famous for its flowers. Maybe this saying also reflects the reality on the ground. Mr. President, Mr. Lowcock said that the market of Kashkul was targeted by a missile, but he did not specify the origin of this missile. He said that there are 8 collective shelters for those leaving Eastern Ghouta. He didn't refer to the efforts of the Syrian government to host 150,000 civilians leaving Eastern Ghouta. He doesn't know, it seems, who is managing these collective centers. Maybe it is aliens who are taking care of these 150,000 civilians. Mr. Lowcock said that the United Nations partners and the SARC are helping people from Ghouta. He didn't mention the government at all. If the government has no role to play, why are you asking the government to help you? Why are you sending us requests to approve the delivery of humanitarian convoys? He said that 153,000 people left Afrin to Tel Rifat because of military operations, quote unquote. Military operations between which parties exactly? Who forced 153,000 people to leave Afrin? Isn't it Turkey who forced them to leave? Wasn't it the Turkish aggression against Afrin that forced these people to leave? He said also, he mentioned the Syrian government only once, and he said that the Syrian government approved the delivery of humanitarian convoy to the Rukban camp. He didn't say that the United States was the one behind the obstacles preventing the deployment of this convoy. The United States is the one occupying the Rukban camp and the Tanf area. I will not go into details now of everything that was mentioned by Mr. Lowcock. I will not even go into the details of the report of the Secretary General, the 49th report. I will only give one example to prove that the report lacks objectivity and impartiality. The report has dedicated 9 paragraphs to the suffering of civilians in eastern Ghouta and the damage to the infrastructure there as a result of government military operations, as the report claims. 9 paragraphs. As for the situation of the 8 million civilians in Damascus and the targeting by terrorist groups of the capital Damascus by more than 2,500 missiles and the killing and injury of thousands, as well as the destruction of houses and hospitals, the report only dedicates one sentence about Damascus, and the report says, attacks on residential neighborhoods of Damascus also continued from eastern Ghouta, resulting in deaths, injuries, and damage to civilian infrastructure. End quote. Mr. President, we hope that the United Nations will not repeat in eastern Ghouta the same approach that it used in previous situations by not providing support to the areas liberated. We hope that the United Nations will adopt a new approach in line with the Charter and with international law, an approach based on full coordination and cooperation with the government of the Syrian Arab Republic. The Syrian Arab Republic, which is the only party concerned with the protection and support of Syrians. We hope that the United Nations will not succumb to the dictates of certain influential Western countries in the Council, these dictates which run counter to humanitarian action, the Charter, and international law. Mr. President, the Ministry of Commerce in Syria over the past week distributed 4,000 tons of food to civilians leaving eastern Ghouta, only during the last week. I'm not sure about the sources of the information mentioned by the representative of France. It is only normal. They don't have an embassy in Damascus and they cannot have credible sources of information. In closing, Mr. President, the states sponsoring terror have instructed terrorist groups to use chemical weapons once again in Syria. And I ask you to pay attention. They asked them to fabricate evidence in order to accuse falsely the Syrian government. We have sent you this information yesterday, Mr. President, according to which this theatrical act will be produced by the intelligence agencies of these countries, will be starring the white helmets, and will be directed by foreign media. This theatrical act will take place in the area close to the area of separation in Golan. terrorist groups will use poison gas against civilians in the town of Hara. Afterwards, the injured will be moved to Israeli hospitals. And you can imagine the testimonies that will be made by Israeli doctors when this happens. The same information also refers to another theatrical act in the towns of Habit and Kalbloze in the suburbs of Idlib, where a number of SNG trucks and foreign experts have been spotted. This time, the cast will include children and women from an IDP camp on the Syrian-Turkish borders. I leave you with this serious information. Once again, thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement.